Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Start Small, Think Big podcast. My name is Brad Grew, founder and CEO of Digital Meld.
And I'm Robert Grew, CTO.
And Carrie Hungley, Chief Growth Officer.
Today, we're going to be talking about practical AI use cases for business. Everywhere we go, we hear lots of buzzwords about AI, but nobody's really talking about the best and practical ways for using AI. We hear about AI software as a service and AI here, AI there, AI everywhere kind of. And we want to talk about just practical, approachable use cases for AI in the business world. And as we get down to that topic, we'll kind of touch base on ways that you can use AIs today in your business, or your pathway to using bigger and grander AI visions, like maybe something vision learning based or something at a grander vision scale. But for the most part, I think we're just going to get started and just talk about some exciting things happening in the AI space today. Robert, do you want to start us off with just some news and things going on in the AI space?
Yeah, and I think some of the news topics I have aren't, I guess you can make the argument they're focused on AI, but it's more so technology, data specifically. And the first one that comes to my mind is today. We're recording on Monday, March 24th. So today, the 23andMe filed for bankruptcy. Instantly in my brain, I'm thinking, like, what happens with all that data that everybody gave this company? Obviously, I'm sure they had a very well-crafted terms of service, but it worries me, especially with AI now that can analyze all this stuff way faster than any other system before. So I don't know if you guys have any comments about that, but I just thought that was interesting and the implications that could bring.
Yeah, that's a pretty scary one because we've already seen where like sharing of DNA data has helped catch murderers and criminals as law enforcement has gotten access to these databases. And it didn't even necessarily need to be your DNA. It was your direct relative's DNA or even an extended relative DNA. There's dozens of cases about that actually being out there. And so we can argue back and forth whether that's a good thing or a bad thing. Hey, we're getting murderers off the street. But I think the big thing is those are like outliers, right? At the end of the day, like our data from tens of millions of people is shared to all of these DNA services. 23andMe isn't the only one. They were just the largest and the first kind of one that was adopted. And so it's pretty scary to when you have no control of, when that goes to bankruptcy court, who's going to buy that data? Is it going to be advertisers? Is it going to be these data brokers that sell data to these large corporations and mega corporations? Is it going to be a rogue state? Like, who's to say that like a Chinese backed or Russian backed entity doesn't come in and like buy all of that data and they get hundreds of millions of DNA profiles on Americans? And personal details. It's not just your DNA profile. It's your name, your address, your relatives. And it's pretty scary thought. So I'm glad you brought it up because, again, we kind of touched base on the security and governance aspect of AI and data and analytics and automation from the business perspective, but the private perspective is also there. Like if this was a business, this was an open company that was dealing with all this data for users. And it's a wild frontier.
Yeah, I'll add before you go, Carrie, sorry, the number of users, 13 million is what is reported.
Yeah, it's an interesting contrast to what I mentioned last week of, now we're in the day and age where you can get a blood test and you can get specific, even catered pharmaceuticals. Like that's the positive end. But I think it just highlights with everything in life, there's always the flip side of the coin, no matter what. And so as companies who are housing a lot of data, either intentionally or unintentionally, I think the private push towards intentional and known guardrails around that data is going to become more and more important. And so, don't be one of those companies that build something really great and then you have a data leakage or something that, undermines that overnight, as we've seen in the past. So it's a lot to think about.
Yeah, you got to protect your personal data too, right?
Well, and that correlates a lot with the business perspective because you have a lot of companies who are just dumping data into these SaaS products. I know there's a major RFP product out there. We won't say what it is, but basically you upload all of your RFPs and how you've won RFPs in the past. So it trains at how your company writes RFPs. And who's to say they're not utilizing that data to help a make their RFP bot better, but then help other companies' RFPs sound a lot like yours. You can take their word that, hey, there's this segregation, but if you're not controlling your data, you have to assume the worst at all times is how I like to do it. And that's why we like doing catered solutions. And so who we build solutions for, they own that data. It lives in their ecosystem. We don't have control on it. They have to let us into their garden. And I think that's the pragmatic approach for most organizations. Some of the bells and whistles that some of these SaaS products have are great, but once the cat's out of the bag, there's no reining it back in. And I think that's what we kind of preached a little bit last time. And we'll definitely get into more security and governance in the future. But that was a great story to kind of start that conversation.
Yeah, thanks for sharing, Robert. Well, on a happier note, if I may share some news, or a more peaceful and exciting note, I should say. So we had the pleasure of attending the Microsoft AI Tour Houston version last week. I think they said they were doing like over 100 cities. It was a really big undertaking, but it was super cool to see how they chose which topics to cover, which things they double clicked on. It was even neat, the setup. It was very tech-esque. So they gave you headphones and you put them on and switch channels. At first I thought maybe there was going to be a silent disco portion of the day. There was not. I'm not sure if I'm happy or sad about that, but so one of the things that they talked about was these new agents, right? And we'll get into that in a second, but I just want to kind of put some context around this. So if you think about how much has changed and the capabilities and how they've evolved, 2022 is where we really started with ChatGPT. By 2023, Copilot was out, starting to help people in the business world or coders. They kind of flipped the script again with Agentic AI. And just to make sure that everyone who's listening understands the difference. So ChatGPT is something that you interact with, right? So it's going to give you ask for a response. It's going to do some work and give you an input, but it's not acting autonomously, versus Agentic is acting on its own. So now instead of just helping you craft that email, it can also go and send the email, help schedule follow-ups, put something on your calendar. So it's much more proactive. When you think of an agent, you're thinking like another person on the team versus just a tool that you can engage with in a static manner. So let's get a little bit more specific. Microsoft is rolling out Copilot agents across every corner of the business. The sales agent that they demoed at the tour last week was incredible. It even included vision learning, which is probably a little bit deep for this conversation. But again, thinking about an agent that's able to go and update your CRM, chase those follow-ups, help send the personalized emails as well. And we're not negating that functionality. And they're adding new features all the time. But Microsoft's numbers are already showing that it's boosting revenue up to 10% per rep. So when you start doing the math across an organization, that's a huge boon.
I think that event was really good because you got a good perspective. It was an event for everybody. It wasn't just IT people. There was business people there. There was executives there because I saw they had an executive breakout session specifically for them. So it's just good to see what a company like Microsoft, who obviously, look, you come into these things like they're trying to sell. They're trying to sell their products, right? So you got to kind of cut through some of that. But I thought it was really valuable. I talked to a lot of people, and I've brought this up before, I believe at least once or maybe twice on the last 2 episodes, talking with internal IT people at these, and everybody's very skeptical of Copilot. And Microsoft is trying really hard to get past that because the IT people know that Copilot, it's not as good as ChatGPT, or it's not as good as Gemini or any of these other LLMs that are out there. And that's the message that I'm seeing. And what I try to help explain to them is like, hey, to you and me, to a technical person, this isn't that great. ChatGPT is far better. But to somebody that is in operations who doesn't have the time to learn how ChatGPT works or doesn't have the time to understand how Gemini works, this is the lowest barrier of entry into your organization. And so I feel like every week I keep coming on here and saying, hey, Copilot, like we are Microsoft partners, right? But seriously, to me, it's pretty clear, given that most businesses, especially ones we're working with, are using Microsoft 365. So this is the lowest barrier of entry. So it was interesting to hear the different perspectives from those IT folks. And hopefully I was able to sway some people's minds on it, because seriously, just enabling that. And that was kind of the whole message that I got, is like, hey, turn on Microsoft 365 Copilot. It's free now with every license they provide. There's no reason why you shouldn't turn it on, was their message. And I think there's arguments on both sides, but that wasn't specifically to the agents, Carrie, but I think that was my takeaway overall of that event.
Yeah, that's great. And in a way, there's a lot of parallel to just the 23andMe story, right? Because with Copilot, it's inside of your environment. It's not at risk for data leakage, right? It's just making things a lot better without having that scope creep of putting data in additional systems that you don't know what their future holds, right? I'm pretty sure we can all agree that Microsoft is probably not going bankrupt anytime soon. So I would say there's a little bit more stability there. By a little, I mean a lot. And so some of the other types of agents they're releasing, is a finance agent that can help, with forecasting or spotting trends or creating visual graphics. So, you're spending less time on the number crunching and more time really understanding and implementing insights, which is the goal, right? HR for onboarding, answering questions or FAQs. You get a new hire or even someone that's been there for a while. Like a lot of HR is stuff that's the same questions over and over again, but maybe it's not shared broadly because there's always a little element of confidentiality, but you could still pare that down to more of a general FAQ and then save the interpersonal conversations, some more interpersonally sensitive data. Marketing, so crafting strategies, again, number crunching, even beginning like a draft of a campaign or messaging. Adobe's even getting in on that with some campaign tools, and then a support copilot that help up again FAQs, pulling up articles, saving time for the more complicated things that need hands and eyes on keyboards versus answering the little minutia questions. The end of the day, what this is all about is streamlining, it's boosting productivity, and it's sharpening decision-making abilities. And it's really reshaping industries. Sales teams are closing more deals, finance is being able to make smarter forecasting, and HR is truly able to focus even more so on the people element than all of the busy work that's associated with a lot of their activities. Also, I think the adoption to date says a lot. 70% of Fortune 500 companies are already on board with this and building custom agents like crazy. It's not perfect, but there's definitely a risk reward that I would say the reward is a lot higher, especially if you're building it within tools that are more secure because they're inside of your own ecosystem.
I think we can talk about how like using Gemini is easier or using ChatGPT is better or like how you like its response better. The Copilot wins for me because it all has your business context. We talked about that last episode. Otherwise, you have to go upload, like Carrie was saying, PDFs and docx files and PowerPoint presentations to ChatGPT and get it to have that context to understand what you are asking questions about. To me, context is always going to be key. I'd rather have something, a really well-trained agent that knows more about my business that maybe I don't like responses as much. They're about 80% there than one that I have to train continually and keep it up to date and always provide it that more and more context. Like Robert was saying, Microsoft has heard the outcries that say, hey, $30 a month is a lot for us to chew for all of our users. Okay, so let's turn on the free version, which I think is 25 prompts a day or something like that from a basic chat GPT type perspective where you can just ask it basic prompts every day. And then if you want to have agents, if you want to have the meeting recaps, and which we love the meeting recaps, to us, that is worth the price of admission alone. I can actually focus on a meeting instead of taking meticulous notes like I tend to do. And it's been kind of life-changing. For us, that's been worthwhile alone. The Houston AI tour, was just one of many cities, as Robert and Carrie said. Visit aitour.microsoft.com. We'll have that in the show notes as well, which you'll be able to get on the LinkedIn newsletter, the company LinkedIn newsletter for this. Just an example, they're being in San Francisco, April 16th, Washington, D.C., May 6th, and then Atlanta, April 8th. That's just the U.S. region. There's many, many other regions. They're in Jakarta and Kuwait City and Tokyo. Make sure you hit up
free
AI
too.
And it's free. It's free. And so
Yeah.
you just register and it's aitour.microsoft.com. Highly recommend that. The team loved it there. I didn't actually get to make that one, so I'm a little bit jealous, but just great insights. And talk to the Microsoft people too, not just the other people. Like, take your time. We met a really great Microsoft rep, and we hope to have her on as a guest here soon. Fingers crossed. So really, really recommend that. Now we've gotten through some basic news and conversation, I think it's time to kick off what the main topic of discussion is, and that's practical AI use cases for business. And we've talked about it several times. We like to start at the foundation. We like to build on that foundation from the ground up. So Robert, do you want to speak to some foundational things that folks can do to get ready for rolling out AI and turning those things on?
I think the big thing is it's somewhat of a framework, but take this with a grain of salt. This is different for every organization. Everybody's got a different process, but here's how I like to think about this. You need to clearly define whatever your problem is. I know that sounds like, hey, no kidding, Robert. Yeah, that's step one. But a lot of people seem to not understand that. They just hear AI and they just want to throw it at everything. But let's just talk about the problem at hand. What's the specific issue? What are the inefficiencies? Who does it affect? How does it affect them, et cetera? The next step that I like to go on is checking the data readiness. So what does that mean? Do you have the relevant data to solve this problem? Not everybody has that. And that we talked about that last episode, how important data is. Is it easily accessible? Do you have to have your IT team involved? Who is involved to get that data? It's a good question to always ask yourself. And then the big thing is evaluating the feasibility and the value itself. So most things that are highly valuable right now are not very feasible. The highest, if you have a graph, and your feasibility is up here and your values down here, all the stuff in this area, I know my camera's not showing this well, is very difficult to do right now because you got to have all of the data sets. You got to have the internal teams. You also got to have the money if you don't have the internal teams to hire somebody to do the job for you. So you want to go, like Brad said before, the lowest barrier of entry. What is the easiest thing to implement that has the highest ROI? So whether that's, sitting down with a team, we do this often, writing down everybody's ideas and then talking with businesses and talking with the business leaders to say, hey, out of all these ideas, what would bring you the most value? And then it's a matter of kind of figuring out like, hey, look, if we want to build some type of vision model I think last week, the example I used was a conveyor belt to see what chips are bad on the conveyor belt. That's really hard to do right now unless you have all that data easily accessible. And most smaller businesses that we're working with, they might have it, but that's definitely not a place you want to start. So evaluating the feasibility and value, like I mentioned, prioritize and bundle the use cases. So try to make it reusable. I think one of the metrics I saw Carrie at that Houston event was 60% of implementations that Microsoft's doing is something that's easily repeatable. So I think that's something to think about from a business perspective. That's how we like to think about it. So that was really good to hear because I know we've mentioned that before. And then again, we say it's the mantra we have: start small, measure and scale it. So it could be the simplest thing for today, and then tomorrow it could be the hardest thing. So again, the key is to start. Don't overanalyze it. Don't overthink it, because if you never get started, you're never going to finish.
Yeah, and what's great is everything that you do when it relates to AI and automation, especially the initial use cases, you really are building a foundation that you continue to utilize, right? It's if someone's building their dream house, they're probably not super duper excited when just the slab has been built, but you certainly need the slab, and now that part's done and you can move on to the next thing. Or like starting your college journey, you're like, wow, 4 years away till I get that degree, but every semester you're that much closer. And this obviously moves much more quickly than that. But being able to start somewhere where you get a quick win is actually going to increase your trajectory overall versus starting somewhere that's super hard. And also every small project that you're implementing allows the ability to capture more data. So like Robert said, if you don't have the proper amount or types or structure of data to get to your pie in the sky, most exciting idea, you can be working towards that while you're also gaining efficiency and automation in other areas.
And I think one of an actual business use case we could start with is, let's just say in construction management, where you have a project and you have people submitting timesheets and you have people and subcontractors submitting invoices. And so the submission process for invoices and timesheets is very, very similar. Obviously, a lot of times invoices have time data on it. So logically, it makes sense to start with like an automation for the timesheet tracking. As an example, we work for engineering firms. They get in dozens, sometimes hundreds of timesheets per week for their large projects they're on. And when we get in there, most of the times it's literally just going to a dedicated mailbox or to someone's personal inbox, but their inbox within the organization. And then they move it to a shared folder. And then the shared folder, they have like a pre-processed folder and then a processed folder. And it's a very manual process with lots of steps and lots of entering the data. So what we do, we just add that automation step as, okay, whenever a timesheet email comes into the timesheet inbox, we double check that it's formatted correctly. If it's not formatted correctly, we kick that back. If it is formatted correctly, it moves on to where the Power Automate, where it actually automates all of that data, puts it into a table that is submitted timesheets for that week. And then once all the timesheets are submitted for that week, then we have someone put eyes on it, just confirm all the data is correct and say, this is correct. Then once that's correct, that starts off the automation for submitting and creating the invoices, which works much in the same way. And then the beauty is you're capturing data every single one of those steps that you can report on, which can lead to predictive analytics and AI. Like, let's just say you create a chatbot that's dedicated to this project and you say, how many outstanding invoices do we have? And it just looks back at the invoicing system and says, okay, we had 13 submitted last week, 8 of them have paid, so 5 are still outstanding. Those are the types of things we see every single day. And it doesn't take much, starting with automating the process, getting it out of someone's inbox into an automated process. And then once you start capturing that data, you can do some really, really cool things with it. And as an example of one of the things our customers want to hear is they want to know, like, why is one project manager spending more money on waste removal than another one? And they want to know that in real time, not post project. So they understand, is someone illegally dumping on our site? All these kinds of other analytics that you can get.
Yeah, the big thing is a lot of people might be saying to themselves, well, like, hey, Brad, all this stuff's already in our ERP system. But how much stuff is in transit? How much stuff isn't there that's sitting out there that could have been a data point already collected? And I think that's the key, is the data you're collecting, it's from the beginning, not at the end. And so all those metrics are great. I mean, how many people, Brad, have you heard, hey, this dashboard, the data doesn't apply to me, or the data is not accurate? And a lot of that is because the data is just gathered from the end step. But if it was gathered throughout the whole process, how much more accurate would it be? I would argue much more. And so I think that's the key point. Maybe the process Brad's describing isn't AI, right? But the actual data collection and analyzing that data that's where the AI comes into place. The formatting that Brad mentioned, you could definitely do that automatically today, but you could also train an AI agent to see all of your past timesheets or all of your past invoices and compare and contrast and easily pick out, hey, they charged us 20% less last week compared to this week, and automatically send those alerts out. So I think that's where starting small and thinking bigger picture in the long term is going to play out.
Well, as you mentioned, capturing it from the beginning allows for standardization. It allows to make sure you're capturing the same metrics in the same manner and reporting it in the same way, versus if you're doing a sort of post-mortem or some forensics on the back end, it's very unlikely, just because we're human beings, that that's going to be reported and captured in the same way and hitting all those metrics. And it's a lot harder to do meaningful comparison when you're not comparing apples to apples, so to speak.
Yeah, one of the other examples that I've implemented at previous locations, and I'm going to change it up a little bit so it's oil and gas centric, but you can kind of do this with anything. And I touch base on this last week somewhat. Imagine you have a field team, and everybody knows, if you've been in oil and gas, or if you're in any type of operation, manufacturing, you rely heavily on Excel spreadsheets. And honestly, every business relies heavily on Excel spreadsheets. And throughout the whole process, whether it's cost tracking and or project management, you have to rely on boots on the ground people to give you the data that you need to do your job. So a large scale project, hey, we're on step 5. What's going on today? What's already happened the day before? And a lot of the times what happens is a project starts Monday, and by the end of the week, everybody's been working 8 to 10 hours Monday through Wednesday. And then by the end of the week, they go in and update their spreadsheet. But how beneficial would it have been if you had all of that throughout the Monday to Wednesday where nothing was getting entered? That's where I think these AI agents can come into play, where you could, and a lot of this isn't just AI, right? Microsoft is going to throw out AI agents. A lot of this is automation too. So I don't want you to think that as well, like we're just talking strictly AI here. A lot of this is automation. So you could have an agent basically send out a text message to a field employee, and all they have to do is reply to that text message with whatever the status is of that update. And again, I touched base on this last week, but if you have a spreadsheet that has 10 columns that you need 10 fields of data implemented, the only way that they're going to be able to do that is if they go and log into a computer and type out that information. And as we all know, boots on the ground, you and I, everybody just wants to get their job done. They don't want to sit here and focus on these small things that really, at the end of the day, in their eyes, doesn't matter to them. So if you can give them the lowest barrier of entry by using text message, which everybody has a cell phone, I would hope, that's the easiest way for people to reply back with that data. And so using an AI agent, it could look at your spreadsheet, it could come up with the questions on the fly and send it to your end user. And then your end user replies to every question one by one with their flavor. And then that's where the LLM comes in. It could make it readable for you and readable for your business. and put it directly in the spreadsheet, which allows you, in whatever process you're doing, it allows you to analyze that more efficiently. So that's another example that I've implemented that saved, multiple hours a week, and also just gave us the data that we all craved and wanted, but could never get. So think of things like that. Any type of spreadsheet, data entry, that's where these agents can come in. And Microsoft, if you haven't tried it, the reason why we bring up Copilot is right now, if you want to implement like an OpenAI agent, you have to know how to integrate OpenAI with wherever your files are. So right now, if you have Microsoft 365, there's no easy way to do that. Now, there's SaaS products out there that are going to charge you an arm and a leg to do that. And that's why we feel, and I feel personally, the Copilot is just the lowest barrier of entry, because you don't have to worry about integrating your files. You don't have to worry about the security. That's the major point here that I'm trying to make is this is going to get you started. And maybe you end up using OpenAI or Gemini or some other more detailed model, but this is at least going to let you do a trial and try this thing out.
And it's really important as you go through and have these conversations with your organization. One of the huge things for ROI is like, who is this helping? And again, in the construction engineering space, that's a place we know really well. So you'll hear us using it as an example. But like project managers and project engineers are billable at $150 to $250 an hour, depending on the company and depending on the project. So if we can save 30 minutes to an hour of theirs a week, that's the ROI on that is very, very easy to prove. It takes some legwork to get there, but like, let's say you have 25 different project managers and 25 different project engineers and are working on 15 or 20 different projects a week. Like, again, that's 20 or 30 hours of their time total that you're saving just by automating that process, like Robert was just talking about. And if you ask all of them, they all hate those daily progress reports and then the end of week progress reports that they provide to leadership. But those are very important because leadership and or the customer wants to see those progress updates. If you had a custom home built, it's great to get those progress update pictures from your home builder. And like, so we understand why that's needed, but that person on the ground, they just like building things. They don't like going and giving updates. They like building things. And so freeing them up is at the top, should be at the top of your list. And so just as you have those conversations internally, like that's a great way to start, is like, okay, who are we helping? That's the problem you're trying to solve, but who are we helping and what does that free them up their time? If someone makes $20,000 a year and you're automating their job away, is that really beneficial? Probably not. I'm not saying that there aren't great things to do from that perspective to actually help them move on to other things within their career. But Carrie, do you want to talk about like how we kind of approach trying to figure out what are these problems we solve in the environment, like in our lunch and learn sessions?
Yeah, absolutely. So a couple of things that we always cover are what's in your current tech stack? Which of those things are already speaking to one another? What do you love about what's already happening? What are your biggest pain points? Or maybe what are the pain points that you wouldn't rate them a 10 on the pain scale, but they're at a 4 for 70% of your team. Those are the types of things we want to start unpacking, and also really understanding, taking a holistic look. So for instance, with automating their reports. Sure, it's saving time for your project manager or your guy in the field, and that's great. But let's look at a broader vision and understand if those reports aren't accurate or they're not submitted, who has to go and let those folks know and try to chase down the updates or say, this wasn't input, or you missing this part, or you saved it in the wrong area and now so-and-so couldn't find it and they didn't have the notes they needed for the client meeting. What are the implications of that downstream? Because it's seldom to none is it only touching the person that we're talking about, right? And there's not only upside, there's also potential downside. So what's the risk if this process isn't done properly? What kind of liability are you setting yourself up for? Or what kind of insights are you gatekeeping from your own team who you want to be successful? So we really recommend folks to bring a variety of people across the organization, not just one department, as much as possible. We also recommend that, I think it's beneficial to have some of the naysayers in the room, but you also want people who are excited by and energized by technology and the possibilities, right? You don't want to have completely one or the other. And then we'll have people write on sticky notes. Like we'll bring up a tool or a workflow or a topic, we let our clients lead that to some degree because they know what they're experiencing in their day-to-day work. But then on sticky notes, like, what are some of your biggest pain points? What are some of your biggest wish lists? And then start to categorize those on the board, as Robert was saying, like mapping feasibility against ROI, right? And understanding where can we start that will have the biggest impact for the most people, but also the easiest lift. And then you can leverage those efficiency gains, whether that be just time or time and money, and parlay that into the next project. And it also gives people a smaller chunk to get comfortable with. But the biggest thing for me in those is trying to get people out of the silo in their mind of their day-to-day and how it just impacts them or their team in a tangible manner, and start to look at all the other factors because they're not irrelevant.
And I think that brings up a good point, that it's great to have that cross section, because what you'll find is a lot of these organizations, they're not actually talking or cross-departmental. And so it's good to have them in that room where they see that they have these synergies that they didn't know that they had. And you kind of use, hey, we're thinking about this new technology, use that as the catalyst to get these conversations started. And I even said to the leadership within organizations, I'm okay being the bad guy. If you want me to come in and say, hey, this is how we need to make things happen, I'll be that bad guy. I'll take those punches. That's okay, because sometimes you need to, iron sharpens iron. Sometimes you need to have those hard conversations, and you just need clear leadership enablement and leadership buy-in. But to do that, I think you have to have those conversations that show the need for that. And you don't really do that unless you get a cross section from across the entire organization.
Yeah, a lot of these changes are tough to implement without, like Brad said, leadership enablement. Because if you're going to go invest 10, 20 grand, or not, let's not even talk money, let's just talk hours to get a group of 10 people in a meeting room. How tough is that? Especially people that are leaders, where you've got a couple grand probably in salary sitting in that meeting room. So either you get the solutions that are so easy to implement that it doesn't take a long time. So that's where that chart's coming in, where Carrie talked about, or you get your team together and you come up with bigger ideas. But again, that you can't implement any of that stuff without, and I wouldn't even say leadership enablement. It's like a company vision. Your company's got to have a vision. You want to do things differently than others. So it's one thing saying it, it's another thing doing it. And again, I always like to say it's unrealized gains. Those type of meetings, those type of discussions, on paper, you're not getting any ROI, but in the long run, you will. And we've seen it. I've seen it in organizations I've worked for.
And I think that brings up a great transition to understanding, maybe just have another use case for another industry. So energy and or oil and gas, another industry that could do really well from just basically starting at that foundational step and then building the automation and then eventually AI off of that, would be like health and safety. And that's something that happens not just around oil and gas, but manufacturing as well. And so I'm not just talking about health and safety, like boots on the ground, PPE, personal protection, which is great from like a vision learning perspective. We've actually done that. We have a demo on our website. We have a vision learning detection model on our website you can try out. That's great. But also just from understanding what's happening in your manufacturing process, anytime there's a recall on something that was in your manufacturing process. Robert, can you speak to like how you've dealt with manufacturing issues and what ways you can see AI and automation helping from that perspective?
Yeah, the big thing, I'll take it. There was a company I worked for as a frac sand company, and this kind of relates to manufacturing. One of the problems that most frac sand providers have is they'll have what's called caliche in their sand. And caliche, from my understanding, and this is where my IT ignorance comes in, and I need to get better at understanding the business process, but caliche, it's kind of like concrete. And if I don't want to get into huge details of what you use sand for, but it's for fracking, right? So it goes down the hole and spreads the cracks just, by millimeters. And having caliche in there is really bad for that process. And one of the things we try to look at and solve was, hey, could we like put a camera on the conveyor belt to see if caliche is getting it, see if you can see, like, have some type of LiDAR camera or just really any camera that just sits down and points at the manufacturing line of sand that's coming down. And could we tell, could their vision model tell if there's any differentiators? Hey, there's this color looks different, or hey, it could tell the mass depending on what type of camera it is of what's going through the conveyor belt. So that was a very detailed example, but I think the big thing there is when we were implementing that, I think we were a little bit too early. And honestly, now like with the vision learning models, if you have a team of technologists that want to build stuff, that is absolutely doable today. As long as you have the data of all of that footage, it's absolutely possible. We've done it, like Brad said, on the PPE side, but it all somewhat relates. And it's just a matter of having, and when I'm saying data, you may be wondering, like, what does that even mean? So you would have to have a 24/7 live feed of camera footage going down a conveyor belt, then drawing around where you see caliche manually, or you create, if you want to get really technical, create some type of model that can actually do all that for you behind the scenes. The easiest, lowest barrier of entry is to do it yourself manually. And then you push that through a model, and then you could basically have this thing live streamed and be alerted. Operations could be alerted basically whenever the vision learning model saw the caliche down the line. So you could take that outside of the frac sand, put it, I mentioned it before, with t-shirts. If you have t-shirts going down a conveyor belt, there's not gonna be a lot of public models for that type of data. And so that's the key thing too. Like, some people are going to wait for a product to come out to help them solve their problems. The issue with that is some of these businesses are so small, it's going to have to be like this catered solution that Brad mentioned before, whether we're building it, a company like us, or whether it's somebody like you. That's what I try to tell business owners. Even if you're only doing $300,000 to $200,000 a year in revenue, if you could just learn this stuff, put away, if possible, 4 to 5 hours a week to learn this, you could implement something to help your business that no other company will, because no SaaS company is going to develop this, because their ROI, how many t-shirt companies are having this conveyor belt issue? Make sure you just think about those things, because not everybody's going to be able to develop a product for you. You may have to build it yourself.
And the beauty of vision learning is once you learn how to build a vision learning model and or train a vision learning model, and you don't need to build those from the ground up. There's one of the most popular ones called YOLO. You only live once. I don't know about the name, but it's a great model, and they have many versions. And there's all kinds of. If you just go search GitHub for YOLO, you're going to find hundreds and hundreds of examples of people building vision learning models. Once you train one vision learning model, you can train others. But the real beauty of that is with agents and AI agents. Now, the hard part of vision learning is labeling. 60 Minutes had an episode where they showed how most of the labeling that Google and Microsoft and Amazon and YouTube do is they kind of ship that off to like West African countries and poor labor to watch all these terrible footage and say, okay, this one has gore, this one has violence, this one has other things that we don't want to see. The good news is we'll be able to train the models to do that themselves. And that's where agents could come in. And so it's going to get easier and easier and easier to come and train these vision learning models. And again, once you know how to train one, it isn't so much, it's more about the data, as Robert was saying. You need that like historical data. If you're going to train it how to identify a taxi cab, you need pictures of millions of taxi cabs of all shapes and sizes. And then you're training that model like, this is what a taxi cab is. That's really the crux of what vision learning is. And as you do that for everything, you can do some really cool things. And it's not just pictures, right? It's videos as well, so live videos. But now that they have sensors like LiDAR cameras and or gas sensors that it can easily attach to drones, and they're all dropping in prices as technology increases. So things that they're technologically feasible but financially unfeasible 2 or 3 years ago, as the days pass, it just gets more and more feasible to do. Another one's like methane detection. There's methane detection in plants, and they want to know, hey, are we going to have an explosion type thing? Are we going to have these warnings? That's something that was all manually done in the past. And like now they're going to be able to train models to do those things. And so it's, again, you just start with these overall grand visions, the problem you're trying to solve. Then you do that ROI calculation with the graph. Hey, what makes the most sense? And then that's your end goal. I think it's great to have those end goal. Like SpaceX has the end goal of landing Starship on Mars, right? But they've gone a lot of steps before then, and they're still blowing up starships. Now they're catching them with chopsticks. So they're still making progress. And I think that's how you do it. You have that grand vision. That's our grand vision, our end goal. What's it going to take us to get there? And what are the cool things we can do along the way? And how many lives can we improve within our organization?
Speaking of improving lives and the health and safety factor, there's so many cool things that can be done with vision learning that, again, they're not necessarily the things that are on the surface. But if you're looking at like with PPE or any of the factors around safety, what zones should folks be in at what point in time? What about how close somebody got to having an accident? You obviously know when an accident occurred, but what about identifying the people that consistently they're sort of following the safety rules, but not enough. There's several close calls. That's your biggest liability right there, right? To be able to have that documented so that you can talk to those folks, and heaven forbid if something happens, you can kind of CYA a little bit, but it's mostly about the ability to proactively get ahead of, let's not wait till your EMR rating is so high that you have a huge problem. Let's identify the folks that they're wearing one glove but they're not wearing the other one, they're walking a little too close to the no-go zones, whatever it may be. That is a huge area that's now opened up without you having to pay a full-time team of people to be watching the cameras and going back and logging that stuff. Additionally, I'm not a manufacturing expert, so I'll just come up with like a quick example. But let's say if either people are there's a slip and fall, or a machinery is slipping, or some of whatever you're manufacturing that's sensitive to certain factors is not coming out right, and you can't figure out what the correlation is. Maybe that's something as simple as logging that day's weather against the incidents and saying, okay, well, the problem is that on days where it's really humid and so never closes the door all the way, and then that creates this little light film and people are slipping on the stairs when that weird mixture of things is happening, right? And there's 100 combinations we could come up with, but those are the types of things that are really hard to glean until you start bringing in disparate insights. And again, not a manufacturing expert, so Brad or Robert, if you want to put a bow on any of those ideas, you can. But
yeah, I think the big thing here, all the stuff we just talked about for probably the last 5 or 10 minutes, that's all the stuff the CEOs, the executives, they want to implement right now. The problem is we'll talk to people, hey, let's do this. But then when you get to the boots on the ground level, the people doing the work, a lot of the times they may not see the value, or they may not think it's possible. And so you have to start with the smallest things to get them bought in, to get them to understand what we're trying to accomplish or what you're trying to accomplish. I know the whole topic of this is practical AI, but to me, what those scenarios that we laid out are pretty practical today. It just depends on what, your business and your organization is trying to accomplish. So we touched on it a little bit, but seriously, the free Copilot, getting people using that, typing in their questions, their prompts. There's a good document that Microsoft provides. I believe the article is like practical Copilot prompts. And you could take this outside of Copilot, right? You could take this and do it into ChatGPT or Gemini or whatever your favorite tool is. And I could go through a list of those, but I think we should link that in the show notes, Brad, because that'll help people get started to see what's actually possible.
We'll definitely do that. And just one thing we haven't really touched on when it comes to training AI models that aren't out of the box. A lot of what the Copilot stuff is, it's out of the box. Microsoft and other organizations have spent tens of millions of dollars and have terabytes of data that they've trained these models on. Now, as an example for Microsoft, there's no reason to go train a model to do invoices, because you can literally scan invoices in Microsoft 365's AI Studio for like less than a quarter of a penny per invoice. So there's no point in you going and spending $20,000 or $30,000 in compute time training your model. There's just no reason for that. So what I'm bringing that up for is because not all AI models are built the same, right? And that means they're not all trained the same. So if you want to get to like a 75 to 80% accuracy rate, you can do that for 5 figures, or anywhere from like $10,000 up to like 90 to $100,000. If you want to get to that 90+% range of accuracy, it exponentially goes up for every one of those percents. Like the military is an example. When they're using AI in the battlefield, they want 99.999% accuracy, right? So they're going to spend billions of dollars training those models in accuracy. For a t-shirt company building a t-shirt assembly line, maybe they're happy with 92 or 93% accuracy. And so they're able to get that for a couple $100,000. Or maybe if you're doing your invoices and you're always going to have that last set of eyes, you're okay with 80%. So you can actually get that for $10,000 or $15,000. And then over time, you can train it up to be smarter and smarter and smarter. So just remember, there's a whole gamut of scale of costs associated with AI. But the beauty is there are those lower barrier entry solutions that we keep talking about. They already have that cost kind of already baked in. And so that's why they're the lowest barrier of entry. Like you don't need to go train AI agents to connect to Adobe products, because Adobe and Microsoft have paid for that. Now you just need to use those tools. And so that's why we keep kind of harping on that. And AI is just one of those discussions that it can spans the spectrum. And so it's really more about what problem are you trying to solve? What options do you have? And we do the Goldilocks method. Whenever we tell you how you solve a problem, we go, there's soft, medium, hard, or mild, medium, hot, however you want to do it. We like tacos here in Texas, so I say mild, medium, hot myself. We give you that option, so you can have your $10,000 or $15,000 option that's 75% there. You can have your $150,000 option that's 90% there, and you can have your $2 million option that's 99.9% there. It's kind of just up to what your appetite is and what problem you're trying to solve.
Key point there is not everything has to be 80%. Even if you had a first pass that could save you 1 out of every 10 invoices, you can calculate the ROI there. Maybe invoices isn't the right example, but that's the point I'm trying to get across. It doesn't have to be 100% perfect. And a lot of people get trapped in that because they think like, well, I don't make any mistakes. And so if this AI thing makes a mistake, it's not going to work for our business. So just have an open mind and think about that.
When we talk about practicality, there's something that the awesome person we spoke to from Microsoft at the Microsoft AI tour mentioned that I'd kind of like to touch briefly on. She said, don't worry about overly governing some of these solutions. And I want to clarify what that means. And Robert, feel free to jump in. But what she's saying is not don't worry about the governance. She's saying utilize tools such as Microsoft, and I'm sure there are others that have, high security features and all the things built into it, but it's changing every day. So if you're trying to build or utilize solutions that aren't making that natively part of the solution and the platform, you are going to work yourself to absolute death trying to continue to govern something that's changing almost beneath your feet, versus if you're utilizing more tried and true tools, there's no need to worry about that as much because it's kind of counterproductive. What was your take, Robert?
I think that's a good take. The key point is, what are you working on, right? So if I'm talking about a conveyor belt, if that data gets leaked out, I probably don't care about it. I would say most businesses. And so it's build it, create a proof of concept, create an MVP. And then once you get past that point, once you've proved the value, once you can get buy-in, I'm talking from the perspective of internal IT or internal business analysts wanting to implement this stuff, then you start talking about the governance, the security of it before it gets dispersed to all of your end users. So I think that was the point that person was trying to make. A lot of this stuff, it starts with the IT group, and me being in that background. I think on the last podcast I mentioned cybersecurity, that's the immediate first part I'll think about, and they'll just show stop it. They'll be like, nope, we don't know how secure this can be. This isn't going to happen. The point is, you don't have to start that way. You need to do that. You need to implement data controls and data security, but don't let that be the showstopper day one. You could still build an MVP without having any of that stuff.
I think it's really important to kind of look at your AI journey within your organization like you're a startup. So I'm sure a lot of folks listening to this podcast probably have listened to Y Combinator's podcast or any of the videos from Y Combinator. And the first thing you have to do is find product market fit. So you need to find a problem that actually needs solving with your organization. The only way to do that is to talk to people. And then once you have what you think is a good idea, then you have to build that MVP. And then you have to get that MVP in front of people as soon as possible. Hey, here's what I built. Do you think it can help you? I think this is how it helps me. Do you think it can help you? And then you build that groundswell. And then once you get to an MVP, a minimum viable product, and then maybe before an MVP, you do a POC, so it's even less polished. Or maybe that's just on a whiteboard. And then you get to that MVP, and then you worry about the security and governance and how you're going to secure this, because that's part of the actual rollout to production. It's no different than most DevOps products, right? Like whenever a developer starts building a full stack web app from the ground up, they're not working on security the first 6 weeks of that. They're going to build security into it eventually, but you have to get a working product first. But most importantly, you have to get in front of people first, and you have to say, okay, this makes sense. Let's move forward. All right. Well, I think we can just leave it there. Robert, Carey, do you have anything else?
No, I think we touched on a lot of topics. We kind of bounced around a bit, but I think it's good. Having these conversations is always fun. So I'm hoping everybody out there that's listening to this is getting some value out of this.
Awesome. So Carey, do you want to give a call to action to our listeners out there?
Yeah, absolutely. So would love to hear your feedback. And again, this podcast is for y'all. We have these conversations internally all day, every day. So we're recording it for the rest of y'all to be able to listen and engage. If you have specific questions that you want answered, use cases that or wins that you'd like us to share and unpack with our audience, we'd be happy to do that. Again, this is about democratizing technology and making it utilizable by a lot more people. And so we would love input and engagement from you all. You can watch us and listen on YouTube and Spotify. We're also on Apple and any of your other favorite podcasts, such as Good Pods, which we are currently trending on, which is super exciting considering this is episode 3. Reach out to us on LinkedIn and or email us at contact@digitalmeld.io with questions or feedback.
And I thank you so much for everybody for listening. We have had tremendous feedback from this. A lot of what we're talking about is actually fed by a lot of the feedback we've gotten. If you'd like to be featured, and maybe you don't want to show up and talk on the podcast, but if you'd like us to share your story or share feedback from you or share a journey that you've made or how you've been able to sell sort of things, we're happy to give you a shout out within the show notes and or the podcast itself. Again, our goal is to, as Carrie said, democratize this technology. The beauty is the little guys can outpunch the big guys now because we can be more nimble. We can do things that they can't do faster than they can do. And our goal is to prepare all of you to be really successful with this. Thank you for joining us for this episode of Start Small, Think Big. We'll see you next week. Bye.